It's my first question here, and I'll just preface this question by saying that I am a big fan of yours and a big proponent for the life-saving, life extension technologies that you've advocated. I routinely get into arguments with my friends, both left-wing friends and right-wing friends, who believe that transhumanism is somehow, wrong or misguided, and I'll address the right-wing argument in a second. But when I talk to my friends who are politically liberal or left-wing, they will often say that life extension is a bad idea because in their view there are already too many people. The world is overpopulated, and if people live longer it will just exacerbate the problem. It will cause the population to rise further. So how would you respond to progressives who cite these kind of environmental and ecological concerns?
Well, when we discuss transhumanism, we really have to take a step back from ourselves, literally ourselves. Because when we look at the world, we kind of anthropomorphize it. We picture it as we are right now, human beings with 3-pound brains on our shoulders and biological creatures kind of moving through, planet Earth. And that's not the transhumanist future. In fact, that's not even the future of the 22nd century. We're talking about artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, cyborgism, robots. We're very likely not to remain mostly flesh, even by the time this century runs out. So when you talk about overpopulation, you're talking about a specific human phenomenon that exists on planet Earth right now. And I do believe the planet is overpopulated right now. There's no question we're causing environmental destruction. But the transhumanist future beyond 22nd century, 23rd century, all those other things, this is not about human beings eating or drinking wine or using the bathroom. We're talking about virtual beings. We're talking about cyborgs becoming pure data, wandering the cosmos through the singularity. This is the evolution of the transhumanist future. So a lot of people, when they talk about overpopulation, they seem to think of it only in terms of where the human being has been the last few 100,000 years. That's just not what we're going to be. It doesn't involve biological beings. It doesn't involve consumerism of the massive resources of planet Earth.
Right. Okay, well, that's interesting, and I think it's worth noting that Peter Singer, who's one of the most respected voices when it comes to these kinds of issues regarding overpopulation and animal rights and man's place in nature, Singer has recently apparently come out in support of transhumanism and in support of Aubrey de Grey, and so that should be of some assurance to people who are looking at this issue from the environmental perspective. But I think one other thing that I think that people on the left, they kind of have a naive idea, and not all of the people on the left, but just some of the people on the left who oppose transhumanism, they have this kind of idea that, death is just part of the cycle of life, that animals die and humans die, and that's okay, that's just the way it's supposed to be, that nature is basically benevolent, and that if humans meddle with nature, they are committing some kind of sin. How would you respond to that idea that it is wrong to quote-unquote tamper with nature?
Well, this is the thing with transhumanism. We don't believe in this word, quote, natural. There is nothing natural to transhumanism. We think everything is done by our hands, by our will. We're people that want to transform the planet, transform the human experience, transform the human body. So there's nothing natural, there's nothing that's our place in the universe, none of that. The universe is our sandbox to be done with whatever we want to do. We sort of appeared here, we don't know why, but we're given the sandbox. Let's make the most of it. Let's build the most amazing sandcastles we can build. And the most important thing about the sandbox is to remember that if we don't overcome our mortality, we're going to die, and the sandbox would just have been a place to play for 80 years. So the very first thing that we must do in the life extension and transhumanist movement is to conquer human mortality, to conquer death and disease and aging. And so that's why transhumanists spend so much time trying to do this. There's no sense that this is our place, that this is natural, that this is something that, it's God-given or something like this. No, death is a problem. We are biological creatures that evolved to die and, pass on our genes to the next set of offspring, next generation. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be any way that we want to build that sandbox, anything that we want to make in it. And if we want to make it so that we never die, then that's exactly what transhumanists are going to do. And of course, that's what they are trying to do. But this idea of natural, this meaning of the word natural, the meaning of the word the words our place in the grand order. Nothing like that exists in the transhumanist mindset. The only thing that exists is whatever we can create with the universe, that's what we can create.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. And I think it's also worth mentioning that nature is not as benevolent as a lot of people think. As Richard Dawkins has noted in his book Out of Eden, the amount of suffering and death in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. The natural state is very predatory and very nightmarish. But
I also can't say enough about that specifically. Nature in itself is a dog-eat-dog world. I mean, it's as cruel as it can be. I mean, it's literally if my cat will start eating me after a day or two, if nobody feeds it. Nature, and this is an animal that's a mammal that loves me, let alone some of the other things out there like viruses and different types of diseases and whatnot.
Right.
No, nature doesn't care at all. In fact, it's only humans that really have this great benevolence in mammals themselves, but humans especially, try to change nature and make something more benevolent out of it.
Yeah, I agree completely. So in regards to the conservative arguments, when I talk to my conservative friends on the topic of transhumanism, first of all, I am a conservative. I'm a Christian conservative. I've never voted for a Democrat in my entire life. But I've noticed kind of an alarming trend on the right. I listen to all the conservative talk radio shows. I listen to Alex Jones and Steve Quayle, and I love these shows. They're very entertaining. But there's a recent trend where these conservative shows have started to take a anti-technology stance and an anti-medicine stance. They oppose vaccinations, even though vaccinations have saved millions of lives, and they oppose transhumanism, even though transhumanism, I think, will save millions of lives in the long run. And these conspiracy-themed shows have convinced people to believe in ridiculous things like Bigfoot and Martians and UFOs and giants and all of this childish nonsense. So it's extremely alarming to me that a certain percentage of conservatives are naive enough to believe what they hear on these shows, to the extent that they view science and technology and life-saving medicine as somehow being wrong. How would you respond to this trend? How do you argue in favor of transhumanism to someone who has bought into this nonsense?
Well, generally speaking, I think transhumanism touches at the core of whether you're religious or not. And lately, I've been making a lot of strides and trying to actually reach out to a lot of what we might call religious transhumanists, Christian transhumanists. For the life of me, I can't understand why, if they believe that Jesus or God put them on this planet Earth, well, that Jesus or God gave them this wonderful technology to use to help their families, to help spread the gospel, to help spread their religion, and to make it to do the things that Jesus commanded them to do. And why people would want to say, oh, this technology is evil, this technology is of the devil, or something of that nature, I can't understand. When you're talking about stem cell technology, when you're talking about genetic editing, when you're talking about even artificial intelligence, these are all, if you're religious, something that you must believe God gave human beings as a tool, just like he gave all these other things and animals and whatnot to utilize for the greater good, for the benefit of humankind, for the happiness of humankind. And I think people, if they can look at it like that, they will stray away from this anti-technology mindset. And I agree with you. I'm seeing it grow, this anti-technology mindset across America more and more, because people are saying, oh, this is not the way. But what I think is happening is people are just afraid. People are just afraid of how radical this technology is. And that's the problem. It's really fear that I think is driving people to be anti-technology. It's not the technology itself. By all measures, technology has made the world better. We don't die from various diseases anymore. We can fly to the Bahamas and enjoy a wonderful vacation. We can FaceTime with our parents, even if they live across on the country on the other side. I mean, technology broadly has made us have a much better, much more fulfilling life than I think before. So why people would turn against it has a lot to do with just, I think, the radical evolution of technology in the 21st century, where things change a lot, and it's easy to call technology a scapegoat. Just say, hey, that's an evil thing, without saying, wait a sec, it was technology that when my child was in a car accident that saved it. or it was technology that allowed me to have a child when I couldn't get pregnant in the first place. I mean, there are so many beneficial things. And if you look at it from a religious perspective, now I'm not religious, but I like to tell people, this is God's work manifest, and I can't imagine that people would see it otherwise.
Right, right. And, I think Peter Thiel said something interesting once. He said that what initially drew him to Christianity was the fact that it stood in opposition to death. The fact that the Bible says in very clear terms that death is wrong and evil, and anyone who's read the Bible knows that this is true. And, 1 Corinthians 15:26 calls death the last enemy and promises that it will eventually be eradicated. And of course, Christ, he physically healed the sick, he physically healed lepers, and so Christ was fighting against physical death. Go ahead.
And I think what's really interesting is some people say Jesus is the very first transhumanist that existed. We don't know how he did these miracles as human beings. We just know he did them. But maybe in 100 years, with enough scientific innovation, we're going to learn how he did that, how a human being can raise the dead, how a human being can do these things. And I've written about quantum archaeology, which is
right.
a method that you would reconstitute a person. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day, if let's say there is a God, we get there and look, there's Jesus using quantum archaeology, something he created and then he gave to everybody else to use. So
right.
I think if people can expand their version and not take sort of the really backward kind of Catholic version that I grew up with. I went to Catholic school, and instead take it to the next level and really look into the gospel and open their mind about it. They can see that a lot of the love and a lot of the kindness and a lot of the hope that the Bible tries to bring into people's lives can also be translated into a very scientific method that God could also have been giving to people all along. And if Christians can make that transition, I think we would live in a much more happy, beautiful, fearless world. But right now it seems like a lot of people are sort of opposed to this idea that some of these technologies actually could be a part of God's overall plan. They see it more as a part of evil. But hopefully, when people see the benefits of the technology and the benefits for their family, they'll start to say, you know what, this is a really good thing, therefore it must be of God.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a question about that quantum archaeology article that you wrote for Newsweek. I'll make one last point though about the religious, the what you were just mentioning there about Christianity. In Matthew 10:8 in the New Testament, Christ even commands his followers to heal the sick and to raise the dead. And I don't see many of the Christian critics of transhumanism trying to raise the dead. But I do see that the transhumanists are trying to do that, and they are looking at different approaches to this problem. But yeah, I did want to ask you about that very interesting article you wrote for Newsweek, where you wrote on the possibility of using 3D bioprinting to resurrect the dead. And the full title was Quantum Archaeology, the Quest to 3D Bioprint Every Dead Person Back to Life. And this article was endorsed by, amongst others, it was endorsed by Richard Dawkins, who tweeted it out to his followers and said, yeah, this is an idea that we should take a look at. So I know it's a complex subject, but could you tell us just a little bit about this idea of 3D bioprinting and the rationale behind that article?
Sure, I'd love to. So, ultimately speaking, and try to think in terms of, your listeners and readership in terms of how maybe God might think if that was even possible. Essentially, a lot of people believe that the universe is deterministic, meaning that every action that happens in the universe is something that's kind of predicated upon another action, and therefore that's how God knows about all of it. But at some point, human beings with their giant supercomputers might be also able to know sort of what could happen in the future and what has happened in the past based on just digging incredibly deep into the subatomic world, into quarks and things like that, and using massive servers, massive AI, these kinds of technologies to essentially reverse engineer all matter. So, anything that takes place, even this phone conversation, is really there's an algorithm of however it's happening in the subatomic world. There's atoms and this and that, they're bouncing off each other. Whatever it is, there's math to it. And if you can discern that math, then you know exactly the formula of this entire phone conversation. Now, combine that with the innovation and the the advent essentially of 3D bioprinting, where we can already print, fingers, we can already print ears, we can already print certain parts of the human body. And a lot of experts would say probably in 50 years, we will be able to completely 3D bioprint a human being from start to finish. Now take that, what I said before about the quantum archaeology, where you can reverse engineer the universe, take the algorithms, take the mathematics of what a person is, apply that to the 3D bioprinter, and you have essentially recreated a human being. Now, the key to quantum archaeology is the reverse engineering. If you can go back, if the universe is truly deterministic, and you can go back through these entire calculations of massive servers, maybe computers filling the Empire State Building, and over a period of, I don't know, months or years, however long it takes to calculate, and get back to exactly what the molecular formation, the subatomic formation was of a person as they died. Let's say your great-grandfather, maybe 100 years ago when he died, and we could go back to that moment and then press the print button on the 3D bioprinter. That's how we can print out a dead person with the exact same memories that person died with the exact same kind of personality. I mean, it's an exact copy. In fact, it is the person itself. And a lot of Christian transhumanists have said, well, then, if we can do this, if we can bring back the dead, why not bring back all of them? Because that would be the most humanitarian thing in the world. I mean, after all, what so many people are trying to do is save people from dying. Well, what if we could re-bring them back to life, especially people who had died early in tragedy, or a child who had died from leukemia? I mean, this even has huge implications for the abortion industry. So, I mean, this is an incredible idea, and I've argued that this is quite possibly the technology, or at least somewhat of the direction that God might use in what would be called the resurrection. And so that's what quantum archaeology is in a nutshell: reverse engineering the subatomic matter of the universe to a point when you want to 3D bioprint out people as their mathematical kind of configurations and formulas and algorithms of their subatomic form would dictate.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating concept, and of course I'd encourage anyone to read that article who's interested in the topic. And it sounds like it's a pretty wild idea, but as I mentioned, one of the foremost skeptics in the world, Richard Dawkins, has expressed support for the idea. And it should be also noted that Dawkins has endorsed David Deutsch's book, The Fabric of Reality, which also explains ways in which the dead could be resurrected through virtual reality AI technology. So we are starting to get mainstream scientists and researchers who are saying, yes, not only may it be possible to defeat death, it may even be possible to resurrect the dead. So just by way of wrapping up here, because I know we're just about out of time, but do you, I'd just like to give you a chance to talk about, any upcoming projects that you have or anything that you're working on that you'd like to direct people's attentions to. What do you have planned that people should know about?
Well, there's a lot of speculation that I'm going to run for the presidency again
Right.
in 2020. I was the 2016 Transhumanist Party presidential nominee, and I haven't ruled it out by any means. I did run as a gubernatorial candidate in California for the Libertarian Party. I have now left the Libertarian Party. I just feel like it's easier to stay within the Democrats or the Republicans, and frankly, I'm fiscally conservative. And even if I don't have social views that stick with the Republicans, I am fiscally conservative because I've been an entrepreneur so long. So
Right.
I find myself more on that side of things at the moment. But ultimately speaking, I hopefully have a book coming out, a new documentary called Immortality, where hopefully you'll see it on Netflix or Amazon soon. We don't know where it's going to go, but what I do on a daily basis is try to promote transhumanism, and the reason I do so is because the life extension field has so very little money going into it from the government. And essentially, if the government doesn't get behind anti-aging technologies or things like quantum archaeology or whatnot, then the private industry has to fund it. Now, that's fine. I love the private industry funding everything. But in all honesty, science moves forward in huge leaps and bounds when we have things like let's go to the moon. When we have a project like that. And if we want to really overcome death, or at least make it so that Americans have a choice to overcome death in the near term. Again, people can always die and go to their maker or, afterlife, whatever they want. We're not saying like everyone has to live forever, but wouldn't it be nice if you could take death out of the equation for a child who's dying or a mother or father? And we need funding to do that. And so, a lot of what I try to do on a daily basis is try to get more people interested in transhumanism and more people interested in voting for politicians who might actually be willing to fund real medicine that would, cure disease. We're not talking about, let's have Medicare for all or something like that. I'm talking about, let us spend $1 trillion to wipe out cancer with a vaccine. Let us take $500 billion and make it so that nobody in America ever gets Alzheimer's again. I mean, these are things that America can do, but it's going to take a different mindset. It has to take this idea that overcoming disease and aging is a good thing. It has to hit the culture. So I spend a lot of my time all day long actually just trying to promote that idea. And, it's working, but it's pretty slow at the same time.
Well, that's great. Yeah, well, I certainly applaud your efforts, and I want to thank you again for giving me some of your time. I really appreciate it, and that, I guess, pretty much wraps up the interview.
Well, hey, thank you so much